Your names, what year you was born and what year you went into Booth Hall Hospital.
Right. My name's Neville Ball. I was born on the 29th of April 1936. I went into Booth Hall in 1944 when I was 8 years old.
And would you like to tell me what led to you coming to Booth Hall Hospital from your very beginning?
Yeah, well, my mother had me. She wasn't married. She lived on her own. Both her parents had passed away. She had to work to support herself, so she tried to have me adopted, and eventually I was adopted by a couple, a clergyman and his wife. But because I developed infantile eczema, they couldn't cope with it, and in the end I was sort of returned to the Adoption Society. After that, then I was in care in different places because my mother needed to work, so I was being taken care of in foster care. But eventually my mother, in her attempts to get me adopted, she was told by the National Adoption Society that I wouldn't be able to be adopted because of my eczema. So she just disappeared and virtually abandoned me, really. So the London County Council then took care of me, and I was placed in a children's home in Sidcup in Kent. And I was in there for probably about 2 or 3 years. I went in there in September 1939, so I was about 3.5 years old. And then, whilst I was in there, of course, this was during the Blitz, during the war, and I can remember being in a room, in a downstairs room in the children's home. It was a cottage home, and I was in this cottage, and they built a wall outside the window to stop any bomb blast, and they propped the ceiling up with columns, and we all slept in that ground floor room, 4 in a bed, and you used to lie awake at night listening to the banging and bombing and all the rest of it. And then the following morning we'd go to school and picking up hot pieces of metal, what they call shrapnel. And eventually I was moved to a hospital in West London, and I was there probably a few months, and then suddenly I was removed from there and taken to Booth Hall Children's Hospital, and this would be 1944. And I didn't know how old I was, and one of the staff asked me how old I was, and I said I don't know. And they went away and must have looked up my records, and he came back and said, "Oh, you're eight years old, and your birthday's in April." I'd never celebrated a birthday ever before then. Anyway, when I first arrived at Booth Hall, I was made to go to bed and stay in bed, and I didn't like staying in bed. I was never used to staying in bed. I wanted to be up and about, but the ward sister was quite insistent that I stayed in bed. In fact, they went to the length of putting a straitjacket on me so that I wouldn't get out of bed. But I protested so much that eventually they relented, and I was allowed to get up in the morning, get dressed, have my breakfast, and then I could disappear, go where I wanted, as long as I kept from under their feet. You know, it was sort of, I was like banished during the day. Just used to come back for meals. And then I used to go wandering around the hospital, poking my nose in wherever I thought, being nosy, of course. And I was passing or passing by the laundry, and I looked through the door. There was a big sliding door, and there was a gap in the door, and I just poked my head in, and there was women sat there having their tea break. So one of them spotted me and said, come in. So I went in, and he made me sit down, and he made a real fuss of me, and gave me sweets, biscuits, and all that kind of thing. And one woman in particular really took a liking to me, and eventually I used to go in every day and spend a quarter of an hour or so with them whilst they're having their break. And this woman that took her, Alice she was called, she took a liking to me, and she asked the hospital authorities if it would be all right to take me home, to her home. So that's what she used to do. She used to take me out at weekends to her home, and then she'd take me to the pictures, take me to Bellevue, take me to anywhere where she thought it was okay for me to go, you know. Take me to her mother's house, which was close by on the same estate where she lived. So, you know, she gave me a break from the hospital, and then eventually I had to move away from there, and I went to Barnsley in Yorkshire, and I think it was a disused army camp, because they were like Nissen huts that we stayed in, and I joined a lot of other kids there, and I must have been there quite a while, although my memory's not very good. I must have been there probably about 12 months maybe, and I went to school there, so I must have been there for a fair amount, long time. And then I was moved down to Essex, to a children's home there in Hornchurch, and that's when my mother, when I say my mother, I meant Alice. She wasn't my mother at that time, Alice. She kept in touch with me and wrote to me and sent me birthday cakes whenever it was my birthday. And then she had an auntie that lived in London, in Leytonstone. So when she went down to visit her auntie, she'd come and get me out of the home and take me to her auntie's, you know, and I'd spend the day there and then take me back again. But eventually, when her husband came out of the army, he was when he was demobbed, they decided that they would like to foster me. So they applied to the authorities to foster me, and of course the wheels of progress grind slowly, you know. So eventually I did. In 1948, I came up to live in Manchester. Permanently, you know, as their son. Although they tried to adopt me, but because my mother couldn't be traced, I just stayed fostered, you know. So my Ball is my birth name, but my mother's, my mum and dad's name was Topping, their second name, Alice and Richard Topping. But they give me a break in life. They gave me a life, a home life that I'd never have achieved staying in a home. I shudder to think where I would have finished up if I'd have stayed in a children's home. You know, I'd have been thrown out at 18 probably and had to fend for myself. But they gave me a good life. Well, getting back to Booth Hall, there was other children that were in there that had been brought from other areas of the country, and there's a photograph of them there. There's 5 of them, and my mother, well, let's call her my mother because I regarded her as my mother, but Alice at that time, when I'd moved away to Barnsley, Alice asked the authorities if she could take them out, and she used to take them out as well. She used to take them to Blackpool, Bellevue, to the pictures, anywhere where she thought they would enjoy. And that was that was my mother throughout her life. I mean, even later on when I was growing up, she would look after elderly neighbours, you know, that were living on their own and perhaps struggling a bit. She'd make meals for them and go and do the shopping.
How old was you when you first came, when you came properly to live with Alice?
I was 12. Well, just short of 12. I came in the March and I was 12 in the April, so I was nearly 12. And I was only told the night before in this home where I was that I was told to get a bath. And I thought, well, that's odd. It wasn't a bath night. So I had an inkling of something that was happening. Anyway, I was told that somebody was going to come for me and take me up to Manchester. So a social worker came and, brought me all the way up to Manchester and took me to where I was going to live.
So where did she live?
Dalham Avenue, that's on White Moss Estate, yeah. And it was the house where we lived. It was overlooking Boggart Clough. At that time, you could see a full panorama of Boggart Clough and all the trees and that. It was wonderful there. And I spent hours and hours in Boggart Clough with my dog. My dad bought me a dog for my 13th birthday. And I was in the clough all the time, apart from when I was at school, of course, but I spent a lot of time in the clough with my dog. And I knew it like the back of my hand, because I'd been all over it